In suburban neighborhoods, order was a silent religion. Rows of identical houses lined the streets like obedient soldiers. Lawns were evenly cut, hedges symmetrically shaped, and mailboxes stood at uniform distances from the curb. To outsiders, it looked like harmony. To those who lived inside it, the order was fragile, enforced through watchful eyes and endless rules. The homeowner at the center of this story had lived there peacefully for years. He tended his yard, kept his property neat, and never interfered with anyone. But when his rusting old mailbox finally gave out, he replaced it with something sturdier and more personal, a handcrafted iron box mounted on a polished wooden post. It was not outrageous or flashy. It was elegant, practical, and legal. But to Karen, the neighborhood's self-proclaimed enforcer, it was a direct act of defiance. Karen thrived on control. She wasn't officially the president of the HOA, yet she behaved as though she were. She patrolled the sidewalks, monitored trash cans, and took photos of lawns that grew an inch too high. Every non-conforming flower, every misaligned holiday light was, in her eyes, a threat to the community's perfect order. So when she noticed the new mailbox gleaming proudly at the curb, outrage consumed her. At first, she tried her usual tactics. She circled the property during her daily walks, muttering under her breath. She snapped photos and wrote notes. Soon, a neatly folded piece of paper appeared at the homeowner's door, warning of supposed violations. The mailbox, she claimed, was unapproved and illegal. Fines would follow. The homeowner knew better. He had checked the HOA bylaws. The mailbox met all requirements. Karen's accusations were groundless, but ignoring her only fueled her obsession. She escalated to official notices, filled with vague citations that didn't exist. She began knocking on doors, trying to rally support. Most neighbors rolled their eyes. They knew Karen's antics too well, but her frustration deepened. She began imagining dangers that didn't exist. Delivery trucks inconvenienced, children on bicycles nearly struck, property values threatened. In her mind, the mailbox wasn't just a mailbox. It was a rebellion that, if left unchecked, would bring chaos. So she turned to the police. Karen crafted her complaint carefully, or so she thought. She gathered photographs, timelines, and wild claims of harassment. To her, the call wasn't about a mailbox, but about restoring law and order. When the patrol car rolled into the neighborhood, she strutted forward with confidence, pointing dramatically toward the offending property. Neighbors peered from windows and porches, curious about the spectacle. To them, it was another episode of Karen's relentless crusade. But what they witnessed would quickly become unforgettable. The officers inspected the mailbox, measured distances, and reviewed county regulations. Everything was in order. The mailbox was perfectly legal. But Karen refused to accept it. She raised her voice, pacing in frustration, accusing the homeowner of fraud, manipulation, and even threats. Her voice carried down the street, her arms flailing as she demanded action. The officers remained calm, but Karen only grew louder. She blocked their path, ignored their warnings, and continued shouting until patience ran out. And then, in a stunning reversal, the very police she had summoned placed her under arrest for obstruction and disorderly conduct. The neighborhood fell silent as Karen, red with rage, was escorted into the patrol car. Phones recorded every second. Within hours, the footage spread online. A dispute over a mailbox had exploded into a public spectacle. For the homeowner, it was vindication. For the HOA, it was humiliation. For Karen, it was only the beginning of a downfall she never anticipated. Karen's arrest rippled through the neighborhood like a shockwave. What had once been whispers about her controlling behavior now became open discussions. Neighbors gathered in small groups, replaying the video on their phones, laughing at the irony. For years, Karen had scolded, threatened, and intimidated residents under the guise of rules. Now those same rules had turned against her. The video spread far beyond the block. Uploaded to social media with captions mocking her behavior, it quickly went viral. Comment sections overflowed with disbelief and amusement. Strangers across the country weighed in, calling her Mailbox Karen and turning her outburst into memes. Overnight, she became a symbol of petty authoritarianism gone wrong. Back in the neighborhood, however, the consequences were heavier. The HOA board, embarrassed by the attention, scrambled to distance themselves from her. Though she wasn't technically in charge, she had always acted like the face of their enforcement. Now that image had shattered. At emergency meetings, board members debated how to handle the mess. Some wanted to quietly back her, fearing lawsuits. Others wanted to sever ties completely. Karen, meanwhile, saw herself as a victim. Released on bail, she returned to the neighborhood with her head high, convinced the video had been taken out of context. She doubled down, insisting she had been defending community standards. But where once her threats carried weight, now they only drew mockery. Children laughed as she walked by. Neighbors turned away rather than engage. Her authority had evaporated, yet Karen wasn't done. Fueled by humiliation, she filed formal complaints not just against the homeowner, but against the police themselves. She wrote letters to city officials, alleging misconduct and bias. She filled her social media with posts about being wrongfully targeted, framing herself as a crusader for order. But every move she made only drew more ridicule. Her attempts to regain control only deepened her isolation. Meanwhile, the homeowner's mailbox stood unbothered, a quiet monument to her defeat. Neighbors began complimenting it openly, even asking for the craftsman's details. A few even replaced their own, inspired by its sturdy design. What Karen had seen as a rebellion was now becoming a trend. The uniformity she worshipped was cracking, replaced with individuality. News crews arrived, eager to film the now famous mailbox. Reporters stood on the street describing the clash of order and freedom. The homeowner, though private by nature, agreed to brief interviews. He framed it not as a personal victory, but as a story about community choice, about pushing back against needless control. The narrative resonated. His calm presence contrasted sharply with Karen's erratic image, making her look even worse. The HOA could no longer ignore the pressure. Petitions circulated, demanding changes to the bylaws. Residents, once silent out of fear, spoke openly about years of petty enforcement, letters about garden gnomes, warnings over holiday decorations, fines for trivial details. The arrest had pulled back the curtain, exposing a culture of control. At the next board meeting, the hall overflowed with residents. Voices rose in unison, demanding reform. Karen sat in the back, her face pale, as wave after wave of neighbors recounted their grievances. What began as one dispute over a mailbox had become a reckoning for the entire neighborhood. The board, cornered, announced they would review the bylaws, reconsider enforcement practices, and limit the authority of self-appointed enforcers. It was a direct blow to Karen's influence, stripping away the power she had clung to for years. But Karen wasn't ready to fade quietly. Her obsession had cost her reputation, her authority, and now her standing in the community. And as whispers grew about possible legal consequences, her desperation only deepened. As weeks passed, the neighborhood transformed. Where once conformity reigned, individuality began to bloom. Residents planted new flowers, repainted fences, and installed mailboxes of their choosing. What had started with one bold choice now spread like wildfire. The street grew colorful, alive with variety, a quiet rebellion against years of suffocating order. Karen, however, found herself on the outside looking in. Her name had become synonymous with overreach. Parents pulled their children away when she passed. Former allies on the board avoided her. She had wanted to preserve control, but in the end she had lost it entirely. Her legal troubles lingered. Though the charges were minor, the arrest remained a matter of public record. The viral video ensured it would follow her wherever she went. Job opportunities dried up. Friends distanced themselves. Even her family grew weary of the endless drama. The homeowner, meanwhile, continued his life quietly. He never gloated, never provoked, but the mailbox at the edge of his yard remained as steady as ever, a silent reminder of what had unfolded. Each morning, as letters and packages slipped into its sturdy frame, it symbolized not just victory over Karen, but victory over unnecessary control. The HOA eventually rewrote its bylaws. Petty fines were reduced, arbitrary restrictions loosened. Residents regained freedoms long denied to them. The neighborhood, once stiff and colorless, became vibrant. Gardens flourished, decorations appeared. People smiled more often, and though Karen still lingered on the block, her voice no longer carried weight. The final blow to her influence came quietly. A new election cycle for the HOA board was announced, and for the first time in years, residents turned out in record numbers. They voted for change, for fairness, for leaders who valued community over control. Karen didn't even make the ballot. She faded into irrelevance, remembered only for the moment she had tried to weaponize authority and ended up in handcuffs. The irony was undeniable. She had wanted to erase a mailbox. Instead, she had erased her own standing. And so the story closed not with confrontation, but with transformation. The neighborhood had learned that rules without reason were cages, and that sometimes the smallest acts, like replacing a rusted mailbox, could spark a revolution. The homeowner's choice had reshaped more than his yard. It had reshaped the entire community. And Karen's downfall stood as a cautionary tale, whispered at barbecues and gatherings, of how obsession with control can destroy the very power one seeks to hold.